Hello and welcome to the TV Display and Calibration podcast from AVForums. It's Monday, the 12th of February, and joining me tonight is Martin Dew, Julian Scott, and our special guest is Gregg Loewen. Good evening, guys, and welcome along.
Hi, Phil.
Good evening.
Hey, good evening, Phil.
Right, we're doing things a little bit differently this year. If you didn't tune into the Hi-Fi podcast or the Movies podcast earlier this month, then let me explain things to you. So we are no longer live streaming. These podcasts are pre-recorded, and we've broken out the podcast into various categories. So we now have a podcast for Hi-Fi, TV, Home AV, and we also have 2 movies editions. Plus, when it's a longer month, and we have a 5th Monday, so that's April, July, September, and December. There'll also be a gaming podcast this year. So every Monday of the month, of the year, in fact, you will have an AVForums podcast, even in December, because we are pre-recording these. So we've got plenty to get through this year. And obviously the reason why we're breaking these out into separate categories is so we can deep dive into the subjects, answer your questions. So if you do have questions, then there are a few ways of getting in touch with us. Get your questions in. We'll then do them on the next podcast. So the TV Display and Calibration podcast will be every second Monday of the month. So just bear that in mind if it's the TV section. But come and join us for all the podcasts this year. We should have something for everybody. Now, if you do watch podcasts on YouTube, just be aware this is no longer on the main YouTube channel. This now moves over to the AVForums podcast movies channel. So if you search that out on YouTube and subscribe, then you won't miss any of the podcasts this year as they are published, like I say, every Monday. And of course, if you listen to the audio only version, it will still be available through your podcast provider. It'll just be a new one every Monday for you. So that's how the podcast works. But you might be new to the AVForums podcast. You might not know who we are and why we're around and why you should actually care. Well, we're one of the largest AV and Hi-Fi communities on the planet, on the internet. AVForums has been around since 2000 is when the website launched. The editorial side of things, so that's the side of things that we do here, that started in 2003. We've got over 500,000 members of the website, lots more returning members and visitors. And of course, we cover editorial, which covers TV, Hi-Fi, Home AV, gaming, movies, and physical media. And we create the content for you at the end of the day. We're not sponsored. We're not a manufacturer. We don't work for a manufacturer. We don't have any influence from them or from advertisers. We're here to give you honest, unbiased, and experienced opinions and knowledge. And a lot of us have been around this industry for a little time now. So just to introduce you to myself, if you're not aware, I'm Phil Hinton. I'm the editor of the site. I have been for the last 20 years. I helped build the editorial right from the start with the forum founder, Stuart. I'm an enthusiast first and foremost, even though I do this as my profession nowadays. I'm also a very experienced TV and AV reviewer and a display calibrator, and I'm trained and certified by ISF, THX, and PVA, and we're going to talk about PVA tonight because Gregg is along and he'll tell you all about himself in a minute. So I also produce the videos and reviews and so on. So you'll see my face on most of the videos on AVForums. So that's who I am. Jules, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I trained with under Gregg in 2011 under THX as it was then. As a video calibrator, and I've been doing it ever since. Now also PVA certified and assisting Gregg with the instruction at the present with the PVA courses now. So I've been professionally calibrating for all that period of time and cover grading studios, people's normal TVs, consumer TVs in their homes, and for high-end custom installations as well. So I get to see quite a lot of systems. And do a bit of audio calibration too.
Excellent. And also here tonight is Martin. Martin, introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are.
Yeah, hi. I moved to San Francisco in the 1990s and worked for Lucasfilm THX for nearly 10 years in marketing, sales, and business development on both the home and pro sides, but at different times. I then moved to LA and did business development for the NEC Corporation Digital Cinema Division, and we were one of the 3 at the time DCI compliant manufacturers for digital projectors for the theatrical rollout of digital projectors, replacing 35mm projectors. I then, before I moved back to the UK, I was in the States for 23 years. Before I moved back to the UK, I dabbled a bit, not only working as an actor, but also in film crews. In some cases with DreamWorks and Steven Spielberg's team. So those are fun years. And now I consult to a manufacturer, and I also review audio equipment for AVForums and another well-known magazine.
Okay. So that's Martin. As you can see, bags of experience already. And finally, Gregg. Gregg's a special guest tonight. Gregg, tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been in the industry and so on.
Well, I've been in the industry now for about 23 years as a professional video calibrator and a video consultant. I created the video training program with THX, and I ran that for 11 years. And then I started off on my own with the Professional Video Alliance about 6 years ago now. So right now I'm the founder and the head of the Professional Video Alliance.
And what does the PVA do, just for those of the people out there maybe don't understand it?
Yeah, well, it's all video, and then just as the term says, it's an alliance. So the alliance brings together various manufacturers of video products and other people that care about video fidelity. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether it's performance home theater or post-production or production in studio. Everyone has the same desire for image fidelity. I bring all the groups together so we all espouse those standards, and we all strive to increase the awareness of those standards.
Excellent. So that's who we are. And we're here obviously to try and entertain you tonight, give you some useful information on what we do in the industry, and talk through some of the subjects that have popped up. And obviously we're at the beginning of the year, so what we're going to cover tonight is basically the perfect TV. Does it exist? We're currently just off the hype train that was CES. Lots of new product announced and coming this year, but is any of it perfect? What are we looking for when we say the perfect TV? Is it a perfect TV that exists on its own, or is it a perfect TV for you? We're going to discuss that and some of the ins and outs of choosing a TV and what you should be looking for and so on. And we're also going to give you our predictions for the year ahead. What's in, what's out, what are the trends, which way are displays moving, which way are TVs moving, and what's new with calibration. And we've got two of the best guys in the business on the podcast tonight to discuss that as well. So if you do have questions on anything that we discussed tonight, you've got your opinions or your feedback and so on, you can get in touch with us. It's AVForums on the email. So it's podcast@avforums.com on the email. It's AVForums Podcasts on YouTube. Stick your comment down below. Let's move the discussion down there. We'll do some Q&A with that. Your questions are obviously looked at, and then they're accumulated and added to the next following podcast on that subject. So if you do ask a question, we will do everything we can to ask that and answer it on the next podcast. But before we get started tonight, we do have some competitions and some really good prizes for people to win. So why don't we go through the competitions now, Martin?
Yep, sure. And excuse me, please, while I glance at my other monitor. But firstly, we've got a chance to win a Teak AI 303 integrated amplifier worth £799. This competition closes at 11:59 p.m. on Saturday, the 30th of February, 2024. Secondly, you can win the ultimate streaming system worth £2,400 from Roxanne and Monitor Audio with the Atessa streaming app and the MA Silver 107G bookshelf speakers. This competition closes at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of February of this year, 2024. And finally, you can win a Valencia Tuscany XL Ultimate Luxury Onyx Cinema Seat worth £2,200. That competition closes at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of February.
Okay, that's the competitions. No previous winners to tell you about, but we do have some new patrons. Thank you very much for your support. Again, Martin, why don't you run through quickly who the new patrons are?
Yep, sure. Our new patrons are Jordan Holland, Dave Dean, David, Ben Ackerman, Saab Unleashed, Nick, and Arjan Verdi.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for your support. It really is appreciated. It does help us expand the editorial and these podcasts. And of course, you don't just have to be a patron. You can also buy us a coffee, and somebody did buy us a coffee, Martin.
Yes, Jimenez bought us a coffee.
A coffee. Excellent. Well, we'll share it amongst the four of us. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your support. Right, so let's get on with the show. And the first thing to cover is our Q&A area. So questions were asked from the last podcast. So from X, Twitter, Kieran asks, is it worth investing in the new trend of hyping up nits when in reality one is watching in a moderately bright living room? Also, all these big TVs, what will happen when a bad pixel appears, and how difficult is it to repair it? Right, so just very, very quickly, talking about hyping nits, yeah, that is something that manufacturers do. When they're talking about 3000 nits, that's not a full screen at 3000 nits. That is a very, very, very small area of the screen, usually 3%, if not lower, is where they're getting their measurements and their numbers from. And it's never in an accurate mode either. So when we say that, what we're talking about is in vivid mode, probably 3% window, and basically pushing the TV very hard. That's where they're getting those numbers from. You don't have to worry about nits values and hyping nits and all the rest of it. Manufacturers do that, marketing will do that. If you listen on to the podcast, we're going to talk about TVs and TVs that might suit you and the environments where they will suit. And if you're in a bright living room, we'll cover that as well. So hopefully, Kieran, we're going to come round and answer that in a little bit more detail. And from YouTube, Robert Schmitz 4025 says, do you really think that Sony can compete with micro LED against OLED? Well, they're going to try. I've had a sneak peek of the technology. It looks very, very promising. But the proof will be in the pudding when we get actual retail product in and we can test that. The thing with micro LED is, can you get black's black? Because that's the weak point. Viewing angles is a weak point, and also blooming and other artifacts. So how well can Sony deal with those issues? They look like they're onto a winner with the new driving algorithm that they have there, the way that they've set out their micro LEDs. I've had a sneak peek. It looks very good, especially the gradation of detail that they can get out of each of these zones. So we won't be able to answer that question until later on.
But they're squeezing out a lot of extra brightness, aren't they, Phil? I think you said.
Well, this is the whole point. So the whole point is that they're saying that their professional grading monitor can now do 4000 nits, a new one that's coming along. So they want their consumer TV to be able to do 4000 nits. Again, it's marketing, it's pushing numbers, it's chasing numbers. What's interested me, Martin, with this technology is the gradation in terms of the backlight and how well that backlight is working, and coming out of black, or a black object or a white object against a black background, and how fine they can get the backlight to work in terms of cutting down on haloing and blooming and so on. And also, when you're talking about blacks and just above black and so on, they're basically pushing that as their real plus point with this backlight technology, because of the way that they can drive the mini LEDs. So it looked really, really promising in the demos. We'll see when the product arrives, which is going to be second half of the year. So hopefully that answers your question, Robert, from YouTube. Thank you very much for your questions. Get them in. Either head over to AVForums, find this podcast in the podcast forum, and add your questions into that thread, or in the comments down below if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, email podcast@avforums.com. Right, so let's move on to tonight's subjects. Jules, is there such a thing as a perfect TV?
No.
Greg.
Next question.
Greg, same question.
Ditto.
And Martin, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would assume not. I certainly don't think I've seen one yet.
Okay, so let's get that out of the way, because it is that cliched thing. There is no such thing as a perfect TV, and there is no such thing as a perfect TV yet. Every year in the comment sections on whatever website you look at, whether it's AVForums or elsewhere, people are saying, how could you give this a 10 because it's not a perfect TV? Well, there is no perfect TV. And the reason for that is that there are a number of technologies that are being used to create the displays that you can go out and buy. The two main ones are OLED and LCD. There are a number of different flavors of LCD technology. So you've got micro LED, you have mini LED, and you have LED backlit LCD TVs as well. Those are the main ones. You have LCD TVs that have a full global backlight. You have FAL TVs, so full array local dimming systems. You then have mini LEDs, which have the dimming zones, but then thousands of mini LEDs in each of those zones that can be controlled. So that's your LCD technology. And then micro LED is maybe something we wait a little bit later for, because that is mega expensive, but it could be the holy grail. That could actually be the perfect TV, but it's many years away. And then you have OLED, which has that amazing dynamic range and that amazing contrast, but struggles a little bit with brightness. But that seems to be something, Jules, this year and certainly last year, that companies have taken on board, and we've seen things like micro lens array, which is tiny little convex lenses that are on the pixels, which direct the light straight out to the viewer and up the brightness. And of course, QD OLED is from Samsung Display. It's another technology, RGB display, which is also pushing some nice brightness figures as well.
Yeah, I mean, this last year was quite a breakthrough year compared to previous ones. If, for example, you bought an LG G2, you were probably going to get something in the region of 900 nits peak output on a 10% window. If you then bought a G3, you'd be hitting around 1300, maybe even 1400 nits. So that's quite a leap in a single year, and was an appreciable difference. Most of the time, we're seeing very minimal year-on-year improvements. So there'd be very little difference between a C1 and a C3, for example. But that differential on the micro LED displays was quite a jump. Whether it could be repeated again, I mean, again, we might be back into a cycle of just sort of slight, annual improvements. But certainly, if you bought a G3, it was a big increase in brightness. Same with the QD OLEDs as well. They improved as well last year too. So they were again hitting around those same numbers. And given that most content for HDR is graded to 1000 nits, that covers most of those bases. I suppose what we're going to be seeing in the future with Sony sort of coming out with their new 4000 nit monitor is maybe that bar will rise from 1000 to 4000. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And of course, the reason why we're at 1000 nits is that there's very few, even in the professional side of things, there's very few monitors that can get to 4000 nits. I think the Dolby Pulsar is probably the one that most people know, but there's not one of them in every facility. You have to be a fairly top-notch facility to get one of those, and it's a mega expensive display. And then if you look at previous Sony monitors, Flanders, Scientific, and so on, they've all struggled when it's come to the nit level again and the brightness level. So it's interesting that we've landed on the 1000 nits, because Gregg, in the creative community, a lot of these directors who are making the movies, they don't seem to be getting on to the HDR bandwagon. Everything seems to be round about 600-700 nits in terms of what they're doing in terms of peak brightness and so on.
They are. I mean, they're averaging. They're not hitting 1000. I think with the new Sony, with the new Sony production monitors that go to 4000 nits, I think it's going to open the ball game up. They're going to be able to see a larger color gamut, larger color volumes, and then do more impressive post-production work, in relation to that. We're also finding that the standard for HDR ETOF is supposed to be at 100 nits average plus peak light output. We're actually finding that the average content creator is actually making that average closer to 200 nits. So it's twice what the spec is. We are also finding then, so if you're calibrating on spec, the image can be dim.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah. And of course, we're talking about reference figures here and reference monitors and so on, which to the vast majority of people doesn't mean an awful lot. It's what they see in their home at the end of the day, Martin. So do you think the message is getting lost a little bit, and that's why people are being confused? Because we have market departments who are throwing, this TV's got 20,000 zones and can do 10,000 nits. It's a bit disingenuous for an end consumer who doesn't understand what PQE-UTF is, doesn't understand what HDR is. So do you think a lot of good technology is being lost in the marketing at the minute?
Yeah, I think it probably is. But I mean, I think we're always limited by what's there in the source. But the marketers of the manufacturers are always going to push to the very limits of how they promote their products. So I kind of understand why they're doing it. Bigger means better, but you can definitely be limited. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a problem with the nits game, guys. It seems to be Sony are on this roll at the minute where they can do 4,000 nits in the grading suite now with this new monitor. But again, it's the marketing behind that, isn't it? It's you need a TV with more nits, and I don't think the public actually understand what nits are, other than things that you might find in your hair now and again. It seems to be a strange word to use for a brightness term. So how do we not dumb it down, but how do we make it more accessible to the end user in terms of understanding what all this means when it comes to a TV and why there's no such thing as a perfect TV, Jules?
Well, I think education is pretty critical. As you say, most people wouldn't understand it. Most people walking into their local shop to buy a TV, their eyes would probably glaze over. They'd just be looking at the prettiest, brightest, most colorful picture in the showroom. But of course, AVForums can play a big part here in educating the general public. Certainly, I guess most of the people on AVForums are pretty geeky like we are. And they come in for that information, and AVForums reviews gives people all the information they need. So there's a role there to play in educating the wider public, in addition to all the AVForums people as well. So education is critical. You're probably not going to get that information down at your local store, but we've got to find a way of getting that information out to people, so they can make more informed buying decisions. As we all know, when you walk into the store, the brightest, prettiest, most colorful picture isn't necessarily the best one.
Yeah.
It's education is always important.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, checks in the post, Jules. Thank you very much for bigging up AVForums. It is appreciated. But no, we have a huge community out there of people who are into this, are into the hobby and so on. And hopefully, by imparting the correct information, and that's what we're here for, that then trickles down to not the people on AVForums, but the people who they then speak to, and then inform in terms of what you should be looking for a TV. So let's go back to this. There's no rule, no one to rule them all. And when it comes to TVs, we've got different rooms and different so on. So let's make this useful for people out there. And let's go back to the first question that was asked tonight. I believe it was from Kiran, who mentioned a bright living room. And there's this fallback that's been in the industry for a long time, that if you're in a bright living room, it's an LCD TV, not an OLED. I don't believe we're there anymore, are we, Greg? I think OLED can certainly hold its own now in a bright room, and a lot of it is how to correctly set up not just the TV, but also think about the room in which the TV is being placed.
You're totally correct. I think OLEDs in bright rooms are workable. I think when you're setting up an OLED in a bright room, you have to do a few things different. You're going to have to increase the light output from what it would be in a dark room, because there's more ambient light, and then adjust to a little bit more of a different gamma, which the gamma is the average light output as it goes from black to white, make it a little bit brighter, which will make the colors more pop a little bit and make it more watchable in the daytime. But I have a 77-inch OLED in my living room, lots of light, lots of windows, watch lots of football, watch lots of soccer, and it looks great.
Yeah. And Jules, this is it seems to be a misconception for a lot of people in terms of when it comes to setting up the room, and they believe that they're going to need an awful lot of light out of the TV to make a difference. And I think when we're banging on about reference standards, that sometimes confuses people, because you see the comments where I put it into cinema mode and it's too dark. So if you're in a bright room, cinema mode is going to be too dark, or THX mode is going to be too dark, or ISF mode is going to. So what can that consumer then do, or that user then do, to improve the picture but keep it towards what the director intended?
Well, of course, the references that we calibrate to are those that is standardized within the industry for content creation. That's for a dark room. But of course, we would in a more ambient light situation, we can adapt what we're doing. So you would probably choose a different gamma. You'd maybe go for 2.2 or even lower. And again, you'd boost your overall output either via an OLED light or on an LCD or with a backlight. And certainly in SDR, you can achieve a really, really bright picture. In HDR, where the dynamic range is that much bigger, and you make the content's looking for 1,000 nits, it's not going to be quite as bright because of the tone mapping, etc. But there's still things that can be done. Most TVs will still have a bright room HDR mode and a dark room HDR mode, and so we can still adjust the image to reflect the environment and to give people a watchable picture. But of course, you're gonna, to get the best out of your display, you're going to try and watch in a reference environment. That's the, for me, that's the ultimate goal, is to replicate the environment that the content was created in and was signed off on by the creatives.
Yeah, but Greg, not everybody's going to live in a grading suite, are they? So, for that end user, like Jules says, you can make certain adjustments and so on. But again, when it comes to the room, what kind of things can people do to improve their viewing environment and improve the picture quality?
Well, control ambient light, close the curtains. Even instead of direct sunlight, having a curtain in, so the sunlight becomes indirect, subdues the light in the room, makes it more watchable. Reflections off the screen. All these screens have some kind of a glossy surface. So if you're behind the viewing environment, if you can turn off the lights behind, you'll have less reflections onto the screen, and it'll be much more watchable just by doing that.
Yeah. So again, when you're looking at a TV, what we're basically saying here is think about where you want to have the TV in your room. Think about the room. Think about how you're setting up the room, because a lot of people don't consider this when they're looking for a TV. They just think, well, the TV should go in that corner there and so on. But just think about the room a little bit. We're not telling you to change where your windows are or move the TV or whatever. Just think about the room. Like Greg says, think about what you can do to maybe disperse some of that ambient light during the day and so on. And maybe have two modes on your TV. It's not that big a faff on. You can switch from bright to dark mode.
Just one more point, Phil, is that some TVs have better filters on them than
Absolutely.
others.
I was just coming on to this. Yeah. So
okay, you carry on.
So then you want to go with the display technology is going to be best for you, and then we are open up a whole can of worms, because what is it that you want the TV for? If it's nice and easy, you want to watch films critically, well, there's quite the use case in terms of darken the room as much as you can, try and get a reference environment when you're watching the TV critically, and have the TV calibrated the best you can, whether that's professionally calibrated or using something like filmmaker mode. Most of them are pretty good out of the box now in terms of filmmaker mode. You're not going to have massive errors anyway. You can tighten it up with calibration, but a lot of these settings out of the box, even on the retail sets, and we check them, they're fairly good these days. And like we say, if it is a little bit of a brighter room, they do have bright modes as well. And some TVs now, I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me or not, but some of them do have pretty useful light sensors nowadays, which, used in the correct manner, can make some good adjustments during the day. Obviously, switch it off for critical viewing, but during the day, some of these light sensors, they're not that bad, are they, in terms of what they're doing with the image?
I must confess, Phil, I've never used one.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
Always switch it off. Well, because when you calibrate, obviously you can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't have it switched on. You're creating a moving target all the time. So I have to confess, I don't really use them.
Okay. Right, Greg, any experience, or are you the same?
I turn them off. I'm setting up just a separate daytime mode versus nighttime mode. If you're going to do as you suggest and you turn the light sensor on, you have to turn it off anyway for your reference viewing.
That's
so
true.
Just go ahead and turn your daytime mode on versus your nighttime.
I've got to say, I have been impressed with some of these light sensors. Panasonic jumps to mind. What they're doing with filmmaker mode. You put it in filmmaker mode. During the day, it's looking at the ambient light, it's looking at color temperature of the room, and it's making very, very subtle changes. But it's just changes that you would make by having a bright room mode. So there's two different ways of doing it. You have your bright room mode, or you could use the light sensor. And certainly if it's a brand like Panasonic, who are trying to do what the director intended and trying to fit within that envelope, you can get some pretty good results. So If it's a reference
The light
environment,
sensors can be, sorry, Phil, can be quite aggressive as well, I've noticed.
again, and that's why I say, if it's a company like Sony or Panasonic, that they're going to follow the creators as much as they can. And obviously, Dolby Vision IQ is a technology from Dolby. I don't necessarily agree with what they tell manufacturers to do with the settings. I would go in and manipulate the settings and switch a lot of the noise reduction stuff off and that kind of thing. But again, it's trying to find that balance for the end user. And at the end of the day, we always say, if you're going to do it right, do it to a reference environment. But not everybody lives in a grading suite. So how do we then go to the next step and say, well, we want to get as close as possible to the director's intent? And I think it's a nice option to have on some of these TVs. But Martin, you are right. Some of the previous attempts at this technology haven't been great, because all it's done is just lift the black levels and make the image look very, very milky.
Yeah, and on a big TV, it can be, a sunlight glare.
Yeah.
The other important thing I think always is TV placement as well. Don't put your flat panel display above the fireplace and
No,
break your neck.
no.
And the ideal thing is, I think even Simpty says, your eyes should ideally be about a third of the way up the screen, that level there, because the screen should look rather large. And, if you're enjoying your movies or sports, it's nice to feel very immersed, and about a third of the way up the screen is ideal to achieve that sense.
Yeah.
Well, I did have a very, very caring dentist once I used to go to, and they used to have a ceiling on the ceiling, a TV on the ceiling. So when you went back to your dentist's chair, you could watch TV whilst you're having your teeth drilled.
Yeah, well, but nowadays they put the glasses on, don't with the displays and
Yeah.
and that kind of thing now.
Maybe you
So,
could have some of those new Apple ones on there as well.
Maybe. So yeah, think about the room. The room's really important. As it is with audio, it's the same with video. You want to think about, is the light hitting the screen? Where is it positioned, and so on. Then you want to think about calibrating to the room in terms of your video chain and so on. But if you're just somebody who wants a TV and you want it in your room and you want to get the best out of it, some of these TVs really do look good out of the box nowadays. It's not like the old days where you picked up a TV and it didn't have a cinema mode in it. It just had glaring blue whites everywhere and D93, because it was made in Japan. We've come a long way in terms of displays these days, and a lot of these displays look great. So just think about the room, think about your environment, and think about use case. Are you a gamer? You're going to want a completely different set to someone who's really into films and just wants to watch films on the TV. So again, it comes down to use case, guys, and picking the right TV for that use case. So when we say perfect TV, it's the perfect TV for your use case, Greg, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's all specific for what the client wants. Whether you want to be viewing sports, you want to be viewing movies, you want to be doing gaming, or even like cartoons. It's all related to your source content.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jules, the choice now is quite immense for people, because manufacturers have doubled down. Some of them have made their TVs specific to certain areas. So some of them are going and chasing the gaming crowd and adding features in like 144 hertz and 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs and so on. Whereas other TVs are like Panasonic's and others, they will cater for that market, but they also want to cater for the movie enthusiast and the sports enthusiast.
There is quite a variety, and as I go around calibrating for AVForums people and others, it's quite interesting to see, to hear people why did you choose this TV over that TV? Why this brand over that brand? And there are plenty of people that would say, I just love Panasonic's cinematic picture. I mean, it just, it still feels quite analog compared to, another brand. And you might find people gravitating towards LG for the gaming side of things because it's so well equipped. And then you have other people saying, I just love the Sony motion processing. There is no one TV to rule them all. And it is a use case and a preference case when, depending upon what's your particular poison, what are you particularly into?
Yeah.
So each of these, I mean, the thing is, they're all really good. I mean, as you said, not it's not like it was like 10 years ago. If you buy any one of these TVs, they're not perfect. They each have their strengths and weaknesses, but they're all really good. Historically, we've never had it so good.
Yeah, and I think the choice is out there. So, what are your questions? What's your feedback? What do you want to know about TVs? Hopefully, the guys here will be back most months. I'm hoping Gregg's going to join a little bit more as well throughout the year, because we're going to cover a lot of setup techniques and how to set up your TV properly. When you get it out of the box, what's the first thing you should be doing, and so on, all the way through to what the guys do in terms of professional calibration and what can you do to improve your viewing environment and your viewing enjoyment from your TV. Because let's face it, anything these days that you go out and purchase at the price points that most of these good screens are at, you want to get the very best out of it. You want to get the absolute what you're paying for. So it's about taking the time. It's about actually manipulating the settings a little bit. Some of the research that we did a Moray poll when we did our Picture Perfect, and basically they phoned around the general public and asked them a few simple questions about their TVs, and it was really quite astonishing to find that a huge proportion of those people never touch the settings on their TV. They take the TV out the box, they put it on their unit and never touch it. I'm not talking about AVForums members, we're talking about the general public here. So as Jules says, it's all about education. It's all about just little hints and tips. How to get the best out of your TVs, which modes and you should be using, and if you're a gamer or film fan or sports fan, what should you be doing with your TVs. We're going to do that throughout this year. We're going to have specific subjects for each month. So let us know what you want to know about, what your questions are. There's no such thing as a silly question either. If you've always wanted to ask this question and you've been scared on the forums or whatever, ask the question. You can do it anonymously. We'll give you the answers to those questions. We'll try and walk you through the subject so you're getting the best out of your kit. So get your questions in, podcast@avforums.com on the email, down below if you're watching on YouTube, and of course avforums.com. Go to the forum list, right the way down the bottom of the forum list, you'll find the podcast forum. Find this podcast and then put your question in the comments section. So, is there a perfect TV? Well, there is the potential of a perfect TV. It's still some distance away. I mean, come 2024, I was hoping to say it was only a few years away. I still think in terms of where we are, in terms of yield, in terms of nailing the technology and it becoming commercially viable, I still think we're a little bit of distance away, but we're talking about micro LED technology. It brings the best of OLED and the best of LCD TV technology. You get the brightness, you get the viewing angles, you get the dynamic range, you get the color volume. Every time I see this technology, it blows me away. Every time I see it, it blows me away. The problem is it's so damn expensive. Even a relatively cheap TV is still 100,000 when you're talking about micro LED at any kind of screen size. And of course, they don't do specific screen sizes under, I think the smallest you can get is 78, although don't nail me to the board on that one, I could be wrong, but I think it's about 78 or 79 inches is the smallest this technology will go at the moment in terms of commercially available TVs from Samsung. So guys, Martin, have you experienced micro LED in any way at this moment in time?
I have to say, probably not actually. I don't get that much chance to look at monitors because I work in the audio side of the business, but I'm hoping that will change over time.
Yeah, well, if you're ever in London, go to Harrods. I believe they've got a 240-inch micro LED wall. So, if you want to go and see one, I think it's the only retailer in the UK that has one, but and I could be wrong about that, but it's the only retailer I know about that has one. And it's impressive technology if you just want to see what it's capable of doing. I am imagining, and because they're in the same room, you might be wondering why Gregg and Jules are in the same room. They're actually in Barcelona. They were out there for ISC. If you want to know more about ISC and what the guys are doing out there, we're going to cover that in the Home AV podcast, so next Monday's podcast. But at the moment, guys, you've been out at ISC. I have no doubt you have seen this technology on the show floor somewhere, or you've seen it in the past.
Yep, I have. I mean, Greg, you've calibrated, haven't you, a Samsung wall?
Yeah, I've done multiple micro LEDs now, 240 inches, 180 inches. Very nice, very bright, good black levels. very impressive. I mean, we have problems with immersiveness and like if you want a theatrical experience, you want to put the speaker behind you, you know, behind the screen. We can't do that with micro LED, but they are working on that. Those things where they're bouncing the speakers off the back of the room onto the front of the screen to give you that theatrical experience from the audio.
Yeah, yeah. And Jules, you've obviously seen the tech. What do you think?
Yep. You know, there's no questioning its quality. You know, the dynamic range you can achieve with those black levels and, you know, the peak output at the same time. It's mind-blowing from that point of view. But, you know, call me an old stick. I still like my projection, Phil.
Well, we're going to come on to predictions next, so we'll save projectors for that. But yeah, micro LED has the potential to be the perfect TV, but it's still years away, at least 5 years away. And even then, you know, getting it down to the kind of price points that the consumer can get involved in is still, I think, maybe a decade away before it ever got to that stage. And who knows, it might be something that just they can never get to work in a commercial sense. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the journey with that one. So we know what the current technologies are. We're going to cover them throughout the year. We're going to tell you how to set up your TVs. We're going to tell you how to do things properly in terms of setting out your room and so on. But let's talk about some of the trends that we see coming up this year, because nothing stands still for very long. One of the big trends that we have seen is the nits race. So we're back to nits again, Jules, but there has been this nits race. Now we're getting 3,000 nits, allegedly, from QD OLED and MLA version 2.0 with the new Meta booster. So again, you know, we're chasing nits, but we need to give the education message here, which is that's not full screen brightness.
Yeah, and it's only for specular highlights. So the little tiny, you know, bright shimmering stars or things like that, you know, it cannot be sustained on a full field. If you give one of those, you know, MLA panels or the QD-OLED panels a full white peak output, you'll get a very much lower level of output. And you know, it's not people when they hear 3,000 is 2,000 is, they think, blimey, it's going to burn my eyes out. But it's only for the small, the tiny little things that what I would call the fairy dust. You know, that just elevates the picture beyond the SDR experience, and that's what we like about HDR. But it isn't about making the whole picture 3,000 nits.
Yeah, and Greg, I think the best demonstration I've ever seen of HDR was actually at CES before the event back in 2019, I think, or 2020, when Sony showed off a 10,000 nit TV, which was showing some footage of Vegas and so on. And it's the most realistic thing I've ever seen because it looked realistic. It looked like the old cliche looking out the window, but that's the whole point of HDR. It's to make it look as lifelike as possible, because if you took a light meter out into the real world and you pointed it at a bit of chrome that was the sun was hitting on a car or whatever, you'd be getting over 10,000 nits. And that's what we're aiming for here. It's that realism. It's not burning your retinas. It's actually making something feel like you're actually there.
Yeah, the specification is supposed to be no more than 10% of the image for spectral highlights. So, you know, very small parts, like we said, like, you know, the sun, the headlight, reflections off something, just to make it look much more realistic. And it does look much more realistic. Do that. When you talk about 2019, that's right about the same time Sony sent me a prototype for one of our trainings in Amsterdam. It was an 85-inch, and it did 4,400 nits, and it at 85 inches. And we tried to watch some football on it, and it was actually so bright we turned the backlight down to like 2. You know, just because we were trying to watch football, and it was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and of course the whole nits race, it's not about that full screen brightness. It's about the specular highlights, and I think this is where it gets lost in the mix. Certainly with the marketing, and I think we can point the finger at everybody's marketing departments because they're always looking for the big number. You know, that's what sells TVs at the end of the day. And I think it's a point, Martin, that's getting lost, and that's where education comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. But It does amaze me, just anecdotally, just talking to people who aren't in the industry, how many of them know about 4K. They know the term HDR, and in many cases, they even know the term Dolby Vision. And obviously, that's because they see those brands and those logos on advertising, etc. But people do kind of ingest the basics, and it shouldn't take much more just to tip them over the edge and become even sort of slightly dangerous, you know.
Yeah. So I guess the prediction this year is everything's getting brighter, but not in the way that you think.
Yeah.
So yeah. Other things, and we're going to cover a whole podcast on this, but we're actually seeing larger screen TVs now, and the prices are plummeting very, very quickly. It's really surprising, the size of screens that we can get, even in the UK now. It's always been US driven. You guys over there, you've got bigger living rooms, you've got bigger houses, you've got bigger spaces, bigger TVs fit. But even in the UK, manufacturers are turning around to me and saying, well, our biggest, growth area is 75 inches and above, which is astonishing. And then when you look at the prices, Greg, you can buy a 98-inch TCL TV for $2,000 or £2,000. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So-
Very becoming very economical very quickly. Everyone's getting into it, and they're buying the larger sets because they're less money than what they were, than the 65-inch set was just a couple years ago.
And larger sets are more cinematic.
Yeah.
Why do we go for IMAX? Why do we still go to commercial cinema?
Yeah.
Because we want that large screen experience, and a 55-inch used to be the average size of a TV in a British home. It's probably not now, but it's we want the impact of a larger screen.
I have a 77-inch or 75-inch LED panel in my bedroom. I paid $600 US for it with the mount, and it for watching the news and watching some of the content that we normally watch. It's not theatrical. It looks phenomenal. I have it set for 200 nits. It's doing gamma 2.4. It's doing perfect rec 709.
Yeah. So Martin, is the projector dead?
No, I don't think it is. And actually, I was talking to Jules about this on the floor at ISE. I still actually, on balance, prefer the image that a projector creates. I don't know if it's due to kind of the softness or the warmth of the image. I said to Jules, I would rather watch a grey projector than a black TV. I don't really like the reflective surfaces of a lot of the flat panel displays now. I also think they look a little bit synthetic compared to projectors as well. If you want that really kind of film-like look, it's the projector for me, and I love the experience.
Yeah,
I'll agree with you there. If you want a theatrical experience, it's a reflected image. At the end of the day, that's what it is. But with the prices coming down as much as they are, it has to put things like ultra short throw at risk.
It's hugely tempting, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking about it now. I mean, I saw the 115-inch TCL. Is it the X995 or something? I think that was on the show floor at ISE, actually, Jules.
Yeah, it was.
And yeah, it's really compelling. I think, wow, I wonder if I could put one of these in my cinema room. But the other thing is, I love the luxury. I've said this in other podcasts as well. I love using my masking panels. I love masking to the precise aspect ratio, whether it's 1.66 to 1 or 2.66 to 1. I love all that, playing around with the kind of legacy theatrical formats.
Yeah.
But also, Martin, in this discussion as well, you're an audio guy. Where
yes.
I mean,
but like I say, this is a subject for another day.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's a podcast on its own, but we'll come back to it. But yeah, in terms of predictions, there's other things that are coming along this year, so keep your eyes peeled. If you want to see everything that we saw out at CES, and also Philips made an announcement the week after CES in terms of what they're releasing in Europe and the UK. That was from Barcelona. You can find our coverage on our YouTube channel, AVForums, the main channel. There is a playlist of all our CES coverage. We go through all the new TVs that have been announced announced this year, and the Philips announcements there with their new TVs is on there as well. So go and check that out. That wraps up this podcast, our first TV and display and calibration podcast. But stay tuned, because we're here every month. We're going to have different subjects. We want your feedback. We want your comments. We want your questions. Send them in to us. We'll make sure that we answer them, or we may even do a full podcast on those questions that really are important to you out there. We're here to help at the end of the day. We're part of the community. We're all like-minded people. Like I say, AVForums is one of the biggest communities out there. So yeah, come and join us. Come and ask your questions. You don't have to do it just on the podcast. Head over to the forums. There's owners threads out there if you're interested in any product, especially TVs and so on. You can read the reviews, but also go and check out the owners threads. These are people who are going and buying the TVs and living with them on a long-term basis, and can give you some real feedback on what it's like in terms of some of the things that we maybe just don't have time to cover in reviews. It's always a useful resource. So go and ask the questions and find out a little bit more. So that's it for this one. Our next episode is the Home AV edition. It's out on Monday the 19th of February, and it's the same crew. We're going to talk about exactly the same things in the intro in about 6 seconds when we stop the recorder and start on the next one. And all our podcasts are available from 7 p.m. On our podcast channel. It's AVForums Podcast on the YouTube. And of course, the audio only version is available from your usual podcast providers. So join us every Monday for a podcast. But my thanks to Jules, my thanks to Martin, and my thanks to Greg. Thank you very much, guys. It is appreciated.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And of course, if you enjoyed the podcast, of course, subscribe to the channel, leave us a like, do all the usual cliched social media stuff. And of course, you can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/AVForums. I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.